A scene from Windwalker, an intriguing new film about the American Indian in the West before the coming of the white man. And Windwalker is one of 4 new movies we'll be reviewing this week on sneak previews. Across the aisle from me, Roger Ebert, film critic of the Sun-Times in Chicago.
And across the aisle from me is Gene Siskel, film critic of the Tribune in Chicago. Also on this week's program, we'll be reviewing a drama about old age called Tell Me a Riddle, the newest mad slasher movie named Friday the 13th, Part 2, and now Gene starts with the epic war story Lion of the Desert.
Lion of the Desert is a throwback to the old-fashioned adventure film that sweeps across the desert, and this one is surprisingly well made. In fact, it's genuinely spectacular at times. Lion of the Desert is set in 1930s. Mussolini's army is trying to overrun Libya, and a tribe of Bedouins on horseback is fighting to maintain their independence. What's interesting about the film is that it contains a substantial amount of political dialogue. Some of it, though, is a bit overwrought, as in this scene where Mussolini, played by Rod Steiger, talks with the Italian commanding general Oliver Reed about the difficulty of controlling the uprisings in Libya.
Sent 5 governors to Libya in 5 years. No! Now the military logic of fascism will not be compromised. After all, what are we? We are the bayonets of a new dawn. What are we fighting in reality? Desert tribesmen, ghosts. I want their leader brought here. I want him brought to me. I want the revolution crushed. What's his name?
Omar Mukhtar.
What?
Omar Mukhtar.
Omar Mukhtar. He should be made to pay.
For those not interested in politics, there are plenty of conventional action scenes as the Bedouins on horseback attack the Italians in their armored tanks. Many of the action scenes in the picture are even more exciting than that one, with grand vistas and great charges across the desert. This movie is made on a scale that's truly impressive. The most interesting relationship in the film develops between the Italian general, Oliver Reed, and Anthony Quinn, a Bedouin leader who has an almost religious zeal toward his land. In this scene, both men defend their political positions.
I want to ask you one question. Why did you keep going for so long? I mean, surely you didn't hope to drive us out of Libya with so little, did you?
We fought you. That was enough.
And you cared nothing about the ruination of your country.
You are the ruination of my country. What would you do if someone occupied your land?
Did you ever think how your attacks, my sir, seemed to us? Ambush, murder by night, deception by day, threats against the farmers.
Farming our land. Libya is not your country. You have no right in it. Not to the pasture one cow. Not 1 minute of right.
What makes that kind of discussion even more interesting, of course, is that it just isn't history talking. We can't help but apply those words to current events in the Middle East right now and to elsewhere in the world, which is exactly what the filmmaker Mustafa Akkad wants us to do. The goal of the film is to portray the Arab as victim, and I think it successfully does that in this case, ignoring, of course, that Libya today is a brutal dictatorship. But simply on the level of an action picture, I enjoyed Lion of the Desert.
You know, I think you put your finger exactly on what I was thinking as I watched this film. I thought, as an action picture, it's fun. It's not as good as Lawrence of Arabia,
No.
but it's a good film, and it's been a long time since we've had an epic this good. And yet, I was always trying to get the code, you know. Because it's like the Russian pictures that, you know, they're against Hitler, and you think, well, let's see, I have to move this forward 40 years and decode it to see what it's really about. And it's the same here. The enemy is Mussolini. Of course, we're against Mussolini, but actually, it's a pro-Libyan film. Yet, it didn't bother me too much.
No, because of, I was surprised by it. I hadn't seen one like this for a long time. The Wind in the Line is another example. It's at that level. I thought this one was a little long, maybe. It's about 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
There's an intermission. They could have hacked off a half an hour and I wouldn't have missed it one bit. I saw this film in New York, a large Arab population in the audience. They were yelling Allah, Allah at the screen. And it reminded me of the angry black films of the early 70s where the audience really got inspired by the picture.
You know, one other thing we might mention is the performances. Oliver Reed and Anthony Quinn are two actors who are often given to overacting.
Yes.
And these roles give themselves to overacting, and yet I think they're restrained in their...
Quinn was very good. I agree with you.
Okay. Let's move on to Tell Me a Riddle. This is a good new movie that deals with old age, a subject that American movies generally tend to sentimentalize, as if people automatically become noble and wonderful on their 75th birthday. But this movie is guilty of tear-jerking too, but I like the performances in it so much that I forgave it some of its excesses. Tell Me a Riddle stars Melvin Douglas and Lila Kudrova as a couple who've been married for decades and then discover that she's dying of an incurable disease. Douglas works out a way to take his wife on a vacation to San Francisco to visit their granddaughter, and in this scene, they continue their age-old sparring match made up in equal parts of resentment and affection as they argue about whether they should go to a senior citizens party together or separately.
You should go to the Union Haven. No more farewell tour. You have a right to your own life. Jeannie is strong. I will hold her hand.
And what about me? Alone without you. You always leave me.
How will I leave you?
You shut off your hearing. You go inside you. Back to Oshana. To your books. Books, books, always your books. I don't know how I bear it. Without my comrade, my enemy. My girl. The only one who knew me when I was a boy.
There's some nice, tender human comedy in that scene. I think you can sense that those two characters have known each other for a real long time. Here's another one of my favorite scenes from the movie. Lila Kudrova has run into a childhood friend, a woman she hasn't seen since they were children together in Russia. And on a sunny afternoon down by the waterfront, they're joined by Kudrova's granddaughter, played by Brooke Adams.
So, I said to my father, why can't I go to school? My brothers go to school. I looked at my father, a man of God. He said, a woman is a footstool for a man. So, I ran to Lisa. She taught me how to read.
Eva, have you read Passion in the Blood? Now, that's a book you can't put down. Compelling. I'll lend it to you.
Matthew and I broke up. He moved out.
What? That nice boy?
Yeah. And I think I'm gonna live. Here I am! I survived!
Look at you.
Good.
Now get up. Let the juices going.
You've got great legs, you know that? She's wearing the legs I always wanted. Let me see. Let me see. Up with your skirt. Up. Woo! I'm jealous.
That's really sweet. That's a lovely scene. But if Tell Me a Riddle has a weakness, it's that Khosrow's illness invests them all with reflected nobility, provides a poignant undercurrent to everything they say and do. We never see them just acting naturally. We're always thinking, gee, what does this mean? What's the significance of the fact that she's saying this and we know she's going to die? The movie would have been better if it had been tougher and more uncompromising, but it contains a lot of very good scenes, fine performances by Melvin Douglas, Lila Kudrova, and Brooke Adams. I have those reservations, but I recommend it all the same.
Okay, and I just have the reservations with one thing that I like very much, and that's Melvin Douglas's performance. This man is a superb actor, and that's without any qualification, not because he's old, not because he is about to die in his movies. He's had a great decade of filmmaking. I Never Sang for My Father, Being There.
Seduction of Joe Tynan, the old senator.
And this film, he's very, very good. But my problem is just the thing that you mentioned, Roger. I saw, whereas with Melvin Douglas, I saw a character who happened to be old. With Lila Kudrova, I saw a dying old immigrant woman.
A symbol, right?
Exactly. And she never came alive for me. Brooke Adams, the character, young woman trying to have a rapprochement with old woman. I mean, it was a little corny to me and trying to browbeat me into having sympathy.
You could kind of see the ideas of the movie creeping through there.
Exactly.
You know, another thing I didn't like about this film was Lila Kudrova's illness. I call it, it's a generic illness. I call it Ali McGraw's disease. I've named it after the movie Love Story. This is that kind of illness that people have in the movies where the more sick they are, the more beautiful, the more serene, and more peaceful they seem to be until finally they reach perfection and die. Illness isn't like that in real life. This movie really sentimentalizes it, I think.
Yeah, how much more interesting and challenging the film would have been if she hadn't died. I mean, make the character grow out of their life.
Stick around and deal with each other instead of having all this nobility.
I agree. All right, so I'm down on it. You're a little bit up on it.
Okay.
Windwalker is a film that comes out of Oregon, not Hollywood, and it's a movie that loves nature and the American Indian culture. This story revolves around a dying old Cheyenne Indian grandfather back in 1799, before the white man ruled the West. The grandfather is played by Trevor Howard, and the story involves his death and magical rebirth. Here's a scene from the beginning of Windwalker where the sick grandfather speaks in the Cheyenne language with his adult son and his two young grandsons. The film is subtitled.
Neho na tamko nihovojo. Neto do neha. Me pavedaneš. Na niso na nimšim povoje nišio. Iha mochta. Nexa ev pane wasane nahem yor tinosan.
Namsham hina Jessahe sana hes namsham.
Nishko he sa ministot sa eva. Watam.
Mon visse got skunnev.
O Ottawa Sergei Donev.
Visse Markonov kilts.
The grandfather soon dies, but he is magically reborn because his spirit cannot rest until he completes some unfinished business, the task of finding his other son, who was taken from him more than 20 years ago. This is the way the grandfather remembers the kidnapping in a flashback. The movie follows the grandfather's attempts to find that lost son, and along the way, Windwalker gives us much more than standard scenes of revenge. Instead, we get a chance to examine the Indian concepts of life and death and their notion of the spiritual communication between human beings. Along with some spectacular natural outdoor scenes, Windwalker, I think, is quite uplifting. I enjoyed it a lot.
I did too, and one of the things I enjoyed the most about it was this movie only has Indians in it.
Yeah.
Usually, when you see a Hollywood film that wants to be authentic about Indian culture, even if it's very serious and it shows how they lived and they have the subtitles and they speak in an Indian language, nevertheless, it's always a movie like A Man Called Horse, where they also bring in an Englishman played by Richard Harris so that he can have the experiences happen to him and then we can identify with him. Well, in this film, we identify with the Indians. That's what it's about. I can't think of another film that only has American Indians in it. Can you?
Trying to think.
It's not too easy.
No, it isn't
I don't
easy.
think there is one.
One other thing that's different about this film is the film company that made it, Pacific International Enterprises. They used to do a lot of stupid natural family films. The family goes out in the wilderness and they see a raccoon, and then, you know, we see a tight shot of the raccoon and we're supposed to smile. Isn't that cute? This film, they did something different. They made a film with a brain to it, and I think it's a terrific development for this little company. The grandfather, at the end of the picture, he says to the grandchildren, "Don't be afraid of death. It's a part of life. It's a natural order of things." And I thought, that's a great way to live. And I thought it was marvelous in an outdoor adventure picture to have that kind of a message.
The whole philosophical content in this film is kind of a refreshing change. It reminded me, strangely enough, and this was unexpected, of Japanese samurai movies. It has the same sort of attention to a code of behavior, how you deal with violence, how you deal with death, how you deal with your duties as a man or a woman in the society you live in, and then also the continuity between the three generations of that family.
This respect for the elders is a marvelous thing. I think what we're really saying is that you get a lot of respect for Indian culture out of this film, and that's a big switch for Hollywood.
Now, this film has been playing around the country. It's already open in some cities. It's going to open in others. It plays one market at a time, right?
Right, and it's been doing very well, sort of a surprise hit. I'd recommend it.
It's kind of a discovery, right? This is another film now that is very much of an unpleasant discovery. It's an unpleasantly, absolutely reprehensible little sleaze pit of a movie named Friday the 13th Part 2. And of course, this is a sequel to last summer's movie Friday the 13th, and it's a continuation of the senseless, gruesome, violent murders we saw in that first film. When we did our special edition of sneak previews on movie violence directed against women a few months ago, Friday the 13th was one of the movies we attacked. Well, Friday the 13th Part 2 isn't just against women, it's against everybody. The movie's distributor, Paramount Pictures, isn't providing scenes for television reviews, nor would they let us make an excerpt from the film to show you. Maybe they're not very proud of this movie, and maybe they shouldn't be very proud of this movie, but they sure are advertising it heavily. And that's the strategy behind films like this. They saturate television with a violent ad campaign, hope to make their money quickly before word gets around on how scummy the movie really is. Here's the way this film is being sold on television.
The body count continues. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23.
Jeff?
The day you count on for terror is not over. Friday the 13th, Part 2.
Well, that condenses the high points, or maybe I should say the low points of this sequel. It exists only to show killing and mutilation. In the movie, young camp counselors return to the woods where the summer camp massacre occurred in the original Friday the 13th, and they hear stories about a kid who drowned in the lake, or did he? Nope. The kid is turned into a monster who lurks in the woods and carves up unsuspecting young camp counselors. The teenagers try to hide, but this monster just keeps coming. He's almost a supernatural force. The characters in the movie are never developed. They're just interchangeable victims. And the killer is not developed either. He functions only as a murder machine. The teenagers fight back with pitchforks, but what difference does it make? How can there be dramatic tension when we know this monster can't be killed? Friday the 13th Part 2 is a disheartening and depressing movie because it contains an absolutely negative view of human nature. It's just a series of teenagers who come on screen, say a few words, and then they're hacked to pieces. Among the movie's low points is a kid in a wheelchair who has his head hacked open by a machete, and a young couple who are both impaled by the same spear. This isn't a movie, it's a cinematic geek show. It seems to be made by and for people with no cheerfulness, no hope, no trust in human nature.
I think that's well said, and I can only add that, yeah, when the machete went into the head of the kid in the wheelchair, that's about when I gave up on the picture. Depressing is the key word in this discussion, Because I think some people say, oh, they're just picking on that same old thing again. And what
Yeah.
I'm saying is no. I'm only picking on films, horror films, that are depressing. Not exhilarating, depressing. It's the same movie shot after shot, and it's depressing.
I walked into the theater, I sat there, I thought, gee, the first one made so much money, maybe for part two they decided to spend a little money, spend a little talent, have a little imagination. The movie is so cynical. It's simply a series of mutilations and murders. This movie is made by people who hate movie audiences.
Well, the other thing that I can think of is I had the same expectations. I said, well, let's see, maybe they'll go another way. Maybe they won't have anybody killed. Wouldn't that be clever? Wouldn't that be challenging, fresh? No, no. Bang, bang, bang.
Well, after that, the dogs of the week will be almost a relief. And here he is, leaping into the balcony, our old pal Spot the Wonder Dog, here to announce the dogs of the week's worst movies.
Well, my dog this week is a pitiful sex comedy called Squeeze Play. It's about a bunch of young women who organize their own baseball, softball team because their softball-crazy boyfriends are ignoring them. The whole movie leads up to a predictable boy versus girl softball game where the women try to show the men who's boss, and they're awful bad softball players. The technical quality of Squeeze Play is hideous. This film is barely better than a home movie, and as for any character development, forget it. Some women show their bottoms, others show their breasts. That's about all the character development we get. I was appalled, really, about how bad this film was.
Well, my dog this week is a submoronic exercise in idiocy named Spaced Out. It's supposed to be a spoof of science fiction thrillers, but it doesn't have enough wit to spoof anything. This movie makes Saturday morning cartoons look sophisticated. Spaced Out is about 4 Earth people who are picked up by 3 sex pots in a flying saucer. Also on board the flying saucer is an adolescent male computer voice who makes wise guy remarks about everything, and I'd be willing to bet that that computer voice was dubbed in afterwards in a desperate attempt to pretend that this movie knew all along how bad it was. In fact, whole sections of this movie don't even seem to visually match other sections. I wonder if it was all pieced together out of leftovers, kind of a dog of the week mix and match.
You know, I saw both of these films on the same double bill one night.
How did you manage to survive?
I crawled out. So much for the dogs. Now let's recap the main movies on this show. Both Roger and I admired Lion of the Desert, the adventure film pitting Anthony Quinn against Oliver Reed. The yes next to both of our names means that yes, we can recommend you go see it. We split on Tell Me a Riddle, the drama about growing old. Roger found it an interesting character study with good acting. He says yes. But we both agree there is too much pain and suffering, and that's at least why I can't recommend it. We agree that Windwalker is a special kind of adventure film with great nature footage and a fresh, authentic portrait of the American Indian. This is a good film for the whole family. And we both hated Friday the 13th Part 2, another movie about a mad slasher with a knife, a hatchet, and a machete.
So it'd be an understatement to say that we both hated Friday the 13th Part 2.
Right.
We were both surprised by Lion of the Desert, and we were both very pleasantly surprised by Windwalker.
Yeah, of the whole group, I think I would take a chance first on Windwalker. That film, it reminded me of pictures that I saw as a kid, grand adventure film set in the West, American Indians, a fresh portrayal, though, of Indians, and I'd recommend that for people.
Okay, in Lion of the Desert, you know, there are a lot of people who like big military epics, but they're a lot harder to make well than you would think. You think, well, just rent a lot of tanks, get a lot of extras, but you have to make it intelligible on some sort of a human scale, and I think Lion of the Desert did a good job of that.
One of the things that I thought of while I was watching this picture was Heaven's Gate, the late lamented Western that cost so much money and failed so miserably to be a grand-scale adventure. And here's this film, made by somebody who hasn't made a lot of pictures. I think he just made one other film. And this film really worked in a big-scale way.
He's able to marshal thousands of extras and still make it a film that we can follow and identify with and understand.
Exactly.
Right? That's it for this week. Next time on Sneak Previews, we'll repeat a special edition we did recently on the decline and fall of movies about black Americans. There used to be a lot of so-called black films, and now there are hardly any. We'll talk about the reasons why they disappeared and take a look at such landmark movies as Shaft, with Richard Roundtree as a cross between James Bond and a streetwise private eye out to rescue a hostage from white mobsters. Sounder, starring Paul Winfield and Cecily Tyson in an emotionally charged family drama. The Wiz, a multi-million-dollar remake of The Wizard of Oz that was a box office flop. And Stir Crazy, which found a huge audience by again teaming Richard Pryor with Gene Wilder. That's the life and death of black films next time on Sneak Previews. And until then, we'll see you at the movies.
Funding for sneak previews was provided by this station and by other public television stations.